So the leader of Al-Nusra Front, which is an offshoot of Al-Qaeda in Syria, that means Al-Nusra represents the organization, the hierarchy, the ideology, the political body, the expansionist project, the indoctrination, everything. Al-Qaeda's representative in Syria is Al-Nusra Front. However, this organization tried during the past period to rebrand itself in order to present the group, the leadership, and the people who are fighting underground as some sort of a moderate rebel. So the leader of this group, Abu Mohammad al-Jolani, he was on an interview on PBS. It's an American outlet. Actually, it's an American taxpayer outlet, which is funded by the American taxpayers. He was a guest on this channel. 2 or 3 weeks ago, the journalist who interviewed him, he posted a picture of himself with Abu Muhammad al-Jolani in Idlib. And it's pretty obvious that the leader of Al-Qaeda is wearing a suit and he trimmed his beard and he's trying to present himself to the American audience as some sort of a cute Islamist, you know? So during this interview, he mentioned a few things. And one of the important things that I need to shed light on is al-Jolani says that Al-Nusra Front or Al-Qaeda has taken part in the Syrian revolution for 10 years. And as we may know, the Syrian so-called revolution erupted in 2011. That means the leader of Al-Qaeda is saying that they have taken part in this revolution since the early days from the beginning. And this actually goes in line with a report prepared by the American Defense Intelligence Agency and submitted to former President Barack Obama in mid-2012, which warned Obama that the driving force behind the so-called Syrian revolution are the Muslim Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda and other radical Islamist forces. But back then, Obama and his administration, they believed that it is efficient for them to support Al-Qaeda in Syria, and they created an umbrella called the so-called Free Syrian Army, and they bribed some of the officers, commanders, colonels of the Syrian army and urged them to defect and join the so-called Free Syrian Army. So this was an umbrella that the West, the United States, the European Union were using in order to give the impression that they are moderate rebels who believe in democracy, human rights, etc., etc. And we are giving the weapons, the training, the money to these democratic fighters. But any objective observer, if you try to dig in and see the differences between the Free Syrian Army and Al-Nusra or Al-Qaeda, the differences are very marginal. They are fighting under different flags, but the ideology is almost the same, and the practices are almost the same. And not only that, when Obama, for example, was supplying these so-called moderate rebels with weapons and ammunition, etc., they were basically either giving it for free to Al-Qaeda or selling it in a black market to Al-Nusra Front and other terrorist organizations. The second thing that he mentioned, which is also important, al-Jolani says his group has never posed any threat to the US or the EU, and they had no plan whatsoever to expand or to conduct attacks on American interests or European interests. And he also said that his group has no intentions whatsoever to be in bad terms with this with these European or Western governments. And not only that, he appealed to the leaders of the West in EU and the United States to remove his group from the terrorist list. So as we may know, the UN listed Al-Nusra on the international terrorist list, but in 2016, in order to maneuver this terrorist list, Al-Qaeda or Al-Nusra, they rebranded themselves and they started to call themselves Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS in English. And I mean, this brilliant idea isn't it didn't come from Al-Qaeda, of course. Intelligence agencies and the powers who support these terrorists in Syria, they have told Al-Nusra to change its name and to rebrand itself from Al-Nusra to HTS in order to further manipulate the Western audiences, and also to maneuver this terrorist list of the UN. One of the reasons why also the West asked Al-Nusra to change its name, because as we may know, in late 2015, Russia intervened in the Syrian scene. I mean, just check the coincidence. Russia intervenes in Syria in September, October 2015, and in 2016, Al-Nusra changes its name to HTS. Because for the Americans in Syria, when you're fighting the Syrian government, you're trying to overthrow the government of Assad, and you're not intending, or you don't have a plan to send tens of thousands of boots underground into Syria, American boots underground into Syria, then you have to deal with anyone that is opposing Assad, and that includes Al-Qaeda. Not only Al-Qaeda, but also ISIS. Some people think that this is a conspiracy theory, but it's not. It's not like the United States was dealing directly with ISIS, but they were just like turning a blind eye to the expansion of ISIS and selling Syria's oil and other factories and manufacturers to Turkey. I mean, Turkey is a NATO state, and there is a big NATO base in southern Turkey, and of course they are able to see the transportation of thousands of oil tankers from the Syrian oil fields into Turkey. So United States supported both of these sides indirectly, as I mentioned. And the funny thing during this interview is he is trying, of course, the journalist is not even trying to discredit him. He's just giving him an open access to say whatever he wants. Like, if the same journalist sits in front of Bashar Assad, for example, he will turn into a bulldog, trying to embarrass him, trying to discredit him, trying to dig into every single word he's trying to say. But he was just like relaxed and giving Jolani all the time and air to speak whatever he wants. And the funny thing that Jolani was like, oh, we have to redefine terrorism. So what's terrorism for Jolani is like targeting the civilians and infrastructure is forbidden and it should be called a terrorism. Of course, he's right. And these practices are done by the Syrian regime. So we have to categorize the Syrian regime as a terrorist entity instead of Al-Qaeda in Syria. Of course, he knows what is he talking about. And when he was asked what about the allegations that of torture and killing in Idlib, and he was like, there's no torture in Idlib. And like, if I play the videos that the group of Mohammad al-Jolani posted online by themselves, free-willingly and proudly, my YouTube channel would be deleted forever. My name would be deleted from all the search engines, and I would never be able to speak to you again, because these crimes are horrendous. They're crimes against humanity. And some of these videos, if you watch them, you will never ever forget in your entire life. The images will run in your brain forever. And I have seen many of these videos, and unfortunately I'm psychologically now also damaged because I had watched a lot of these videos, and I had to watch all these videos because I want to know my enemy, and these are my enemies, and I want to know their mentality. I want to know the psychological warfare they are waging against the Syrians and non-Syrians. So it was important for me to watch them. Now, during this period, as I mentioned, there was an attempt to rebrand the HTS. And now when we are, let's say, at the stage of war in Syria where the so-called opposition are no more able to advance, it's over. So the alternative is to prolong the war. First, by economic sanctions. I have addressed at many times and occasions. You can watch my previous videos. But now it seems that Biden administration, they're trying to present this Al-Nusra Front as a moderate rebel group and urge them to participate in a so-called political process in Syria. Imagine that this so-called liberal civilized world will try to impose on Syria to negotiate with Al-Qaeda and include them in any political process or compromise. Of course, for Damascus, this is not going to happen. So when you know that the Syrian government will not accept that, then you are preparing or paving the way for prolonging the war, or the status quo, the least to say. Now, you know me for a long time now, and I'm a person who believes Al-Qaeda and the United States are in the same bed. And the evidence for that is overwhelming. You can start from the Afghanistan war, when the Americans supported Taliban there, and they invited the Arab Mujahideen from all around the world to fight against the Soviet Union. They used a similar technique in Chechnya, also against Russia or the Soviet Union. There was the first Chechen war and the second Chechen war. They used a similar proxy Islamist forces in Egypt to overthrow, to create an Islamic state in Egypt in 2011. They did the same in Libya, and they murdered Gaddafi, who was the leader of one of the most prosperous African countries in the entire African continent. They had the highest life standards in the entire African continent. And they used these Al-Qaeda forces, Muslim Brotherhood forces, underground to overthrow him. They used the same. Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Ahrar Sham, Jund al-Aqsa, Islam's army, name it, man. There are tens of them in Syria to overthrow Assad. So is it a coincidence that all these groups are fighting against the enemies of the United States? Of course not. Maybe on the grassroots, or the idiot brainwashed people who are fighting in these organizations, of course they think they're fighting against the evil forces, but the leadership of these groups are in the same bed and embedded with the CIA and the deep state in the United States. Now, the funny thing is, they're not even trying to hide it anymore. Like, this famous statement of Hillary Clinton. I think this was in 2008 or 9. I'm not really sure, but it was like more than 10 years ago, when she said, "The people we are fighting today in Afghanistan, we have funded them." So she said that before. And now James Jeffrey, he's the former US Special Envoy to Syria, and I think he submitted his resignation a year ago. He said only yesterday, after this interview, that Al-Qaeda is an asset to the US strategy in Syria. So they're not even trying to hide it anymore. And he's right. Of course, when he's in a person of a position, he would never say that. He would never say that. But when he leaves his position, of course, he's more free, let's say, to state what the obvious. And he said very clearly, Al-Qaeda is an asset for the United States, and that's true. Imagine if the United States doesn't have Al-Qaeda in Syria. So what's the strong force that could fight against the Syrian government? If Al-Qaeda is defeated today, in my opinion, the military aspect of the Syrian war would be over. This is in my humble opinion, in less than 6 months. Over. If Al-Qaeda is defeated. But since Al-Qaeda in Idlib, they have a very big force. They're around, I believe, 40,000 to 50,000 soldiers or militants or terrorists. They're also allied with other groups there. So we have also, for example, the Turkestan party. So let me tell you about this Turkestan army, because some of my followers told me they didn't know about this because I tweeted about it. Now, the United States and Europe are talking about Xinjiang every day. If you open the TV, you will see them. Oh my God, China is committing a genocide against the Muslim minority there, and the Muslims are appealing the international community to come and save them. Where have we heard about this before somewhere else? What about Syria? What about Libya? What about Yugoslavia, etc., etc.? And the consequences of this war, are they any good for the people there? You just need to go and dig in and you will find the answer for that. Now, they're trying to encircle China. They're trying to block the access of China the road access of China to the outside world through the New Silk Road initiative. And Urumqi, which is the capital of Xinjiang, which is an autonomous region in China. This Silk Road passes through Urumqi, and the troubles are happening there. So, in my opinion, there is no attempt from China to, of course, ethnically cleanse. That's even off the table. That's not even happening. But of course, there is a CIA attempt to radicalize the third or the fourth biggest minority in China by spreading the victimhood sentiments among them, by radicalizing them through Erdogan's schools, ideology, the Muslim Brotherhood, etc. And in order to turn these people, which is a big block of people, against the Chinese government. It's very obvious. It's like ABC of the American strategy against China. So when we see this talk about the Uyghurs in China, we have to remember that there is a big Uyghur presence in Syria, and their numbers are estimated by 20,000 Uyghurs. And these people were brought by Erdogan to Skandaron, which is an occupied Syrian territory by Turkey, and he promised them to resettle these people there in order to save them from the Chinese persecution. And when these people arrived there, he pushed them into Idlib. He opened training camps. He trained the men, the over 18 years old, and he took the children who are even under 15 years old. They're children 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, and put them in compulsory training camps and to brainwash them, indoctrinate them, and make them the future terrorists. And now if you go to Idlib, you will find a few areas, especially near Geostrategic, which is only populated by the Uyghurs. And so this is a question also that we need to ask of the Chinese. What's the strategy of China to help Syria get rid of these 20,000 between terrorists and their families? So the issue in Idlib is not only a Syrian issue anymore, it's also a Chinese issue. And I urge if Chinese friends and or politicians are watching, there should be an increase of cooperation between Syria and China in this regard, because these Uyghurs are Chinese nationals and they're also posing a grave danger on our national security, and they are committing horrendous crimes in Syria. And I know China is helping Syria financially, but I think there should be more involvement. And I'm not saying a direct military intervention, but rather supplying Syria with intelligence information, with technological equipment that we can track, and the Syrians could, let's say, target the training camps, the locations, etc., etc. So it's very important for the both sides to cooperate in this regard. So as you can see, the situation in Syria, for some people, could be seen as very complicated, and it is somehow complicated. But if we just remember the historical events in the past few decades, we see there are a repetition from the United States, the repetition of its strategy in different places, with minor changes, let's say, in order to achieve one goal, which is to preserve the American hegemony not only in the Middle East but on the entire world. And since China is a growing power nowadays, the United States has to deal with this issue. But how is it dealing with this issue? By supporting or trying to destabilize China through the Xinjiang region, in Syria, in Idlib, and in Libya, in many places. I only hope that one day also the Americans understand the core of the problems and also realize that the American empire that is expanding or trying now to preserve its status in the world is mostly based on shedding the blood of other people and creating mayhem around the world. And that's why a lot of people around the world believe that the American empire is evil. And when you have this situation, the Chinese would come and they are presenting themselves as an alternative superpower, but instead of spreading their own values and their own ruling system, or forcing you to accept their way of life or accept their political system, or dictate or giving you dictates, they're cooperating with you on a business level. And when you have a good business relations with this country, you will naturally have a better political relations with this country. So this is the difference between the United States and China. Although I personally and strongly disagree with the Chinese way of ruling or governing their own country, but who am I to tell them you're wrong? I disagree with them, but I'm not in a position to tell them how to govern their own country. So this is a summary for this interview and the entire situation in Syria and abroad. I hope you liked it. And if you're new, please consider subscribing, guys. And if you want to watch a very short clip of Jolani statement to the American PBS, I posted it on Facebook of Syrian Analysis. I will put the link in the description below. I can't play it on YouTube because of copyright, blah, 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 as you know. And also, I would like to mention that I'm posting books, links for books in the description that you can buy and read. These are books that I have read, and I think they're important also for you to read if you haven't. These are affiliate links. You're not going to pay me any extra money for that, but when you buy from these links, I would gain only 10% from the profits of Amazon, and it would also increase my status in order to bring you a better content and continue in my independent work. And also you can also support me through Patreon, which is very, very important for me. You can buy me just a coffee per month, and for you it would sound very little, just a $2, but for me it makes a very, very big difference. So we'll see you very soon next week, and I wish you a good weekend and enjoy your time.